because this might be the inner chronicle of what we are, and we have to articulate ourselves, otherwise we would be cows in a field.
Welcome to Cows in the Field. This is a show in which we discuss philosophical themes in popular films. My name is Justin.
I'm Laura.
And today we're talking about the 2024 Fede Alvarez film, Alien Romulus.
Is this really where you want to spend the rest of your life?
You know I don't.
Then this is our only ticket out of here.
We're happy to welcome to the show Scout Tafoya. Scout is a video essayist and critic, and dare I say it, big fan of the Alien franchise. Welcome to the show, Scout.
Thank you so much. Before we get any further, are we recorded?
We are recording, yes. Do you want to record on your end? I mean, we're good here.
Oh, I just wanted to be sure, just because usually there's like a red dot somewhere on the Zoom window, and I just didn't see
We're recording locally.
We are not, no video either.
Yeah,
so we can see each other for pleasantries.
No video, only audio, and I've got it recorded locally. It's like I have a pseudo recording studio here that you can't see.
Oh, I see.
This is also not a real podcast. We've just made this up. We're just doing this.
Fair enough.
I mean, it is a real podcast. I mean, what is a quote unquote real podcast?
I'm just joking because, like, what if we never recorded it? We just pretended.
Well, I will say, Scout, I'm glad you asked. I will say there was one episode, The Box with Matt Stroll, where I forgot to record Laura. It was just not her mic was just not live.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize it until after. But now I'm looking at the levels and we're all
You're in
recorded.
there. That would be critically horrible if you didn't get recorded. My contribution to the box was minimal, so it was fine.
It's fine.
It just lifted me right out of there.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what. I'll record on my end starting now anyway, just to be safe.
Yeah,
because you
perfect.
just never know.
Thank you, sir.
Just never know.
Okay, so we're going to get started here. I want to take the temperature of the room on Alien Romulus. Now, I kind of want to get a sense of if you enjoyed the movie, if you overall, or if you were mixed on it, and how you feel about it both as just a film, as a horror film, and then also as an alien movie.
So first thing to say, I really like Fede Alvarez. I think he is a good image maker, and that is kind of my bare minimum for being interested in a filmmaker today. Is, a lot of people can write a good screenplay, a lot of people can come up with a good idea, but if I'm not sort of visually drawn into what you're doing, it doesn't really matter. And, preferably the visual schema that you take in order to tell your story should have something to do with, with the story that you're telling and the milieu you're creating and all these other wonderful things. So I think as a continuation of what Fede has achieved as a director so far, I think Alien Romulus is a good use of his spatial sense. I think it's a good use of his left-wing concerns, which I think are obviously grounded in the fact that he comes from Uruguay, which was a beleaguered, besieged state. He was born right as the government was sort of in the thick of a crackdown that saw a lot of people disappeared and tortured and killed. And so by the time he was an adolescent and would have been watching movies like Aliens, he had sort of seen his country go through a lot of turmoil, and there was still a little bit ahead, but they've since sort of righted the course a little bit, and they became one of the first nations to legalize cannabis and abortion and a handful of other things. And they have a conservative government now, but I don't think he's doing like massive rollbacks, but I could be wrong about that. So regardless, I think at its heart, this is a very, very fine film from a very personal place. But I think that he stumbled quite a bit in giving what he imagined the fans wanted to them. Because I'm of a mind, as a fan of Prometheus and Alien Covenant, that you should never give the fans what they want, because the fans are a terrible people. They are a rabble. They are grotesques in the public square. Why on earth would you give them what they want? They don't deserve what they want. They never have. What they should be happy for is good singular art. Don't give me what I want. I don't know what I want. Nobody does. And so, the big things, which I'm sure we'll talk about in depth, the introduction of two elements in particular, I found extraordinarily clumsy. And I think they kind of take away from what he does best, which I was bummed to see, because I really like him and I'm rooting for him.
I'm curious, Laura, what did you think when you went in the film? How'd you feel coming up?
I had a good time. I think my expectations were not extraordinarily high. I am also a fan of the weirdo Ridley Scott prequels, and I want him to keep letting his freak flag fly that way.
Absolutely.
I had a feeling. I mean, I had heard this one was set in between Alien and Aliens, and so I had a sense of what to expect, and that it was sort of like a return to that earlier form of if we're not saying the franchise, these series of films. I think there were a lot of endings. It felt a little long. I felt my attention wander towards the end, but scene to scene, I was having a good time. I think Kaylee's really, the two main actors are very compelling, and I had a good time. And I felt him sort of really straining to be Ridley Scott and to be James Cameron and to do all the things. It's tough. It's tough to, it's hard. It's big footsteps to follow in. And I wish that we had more opportunities for directors to just go forth and do their own thing.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I think I like a lot of what you guys are saying. I mean, I was actually pretty disappointed by the film, but I think there is a lot of really interesting stuff there. And I think, to your point about the image dimension of it, Scout, I think the images are really cool and are quite compelling and are well executed. In particular, I believe it's called Jackson's Star, the planet they start out on.
Oh, incredible! Yeah, incredible stuff.
Really nice, really cool, really great design, and it felt real, and it felt a disaster place in a way. And I given that this is an immigration story, as Fede Alvarez has spoken about explicitly, that this is a story of people, trying to escape a terrible situation and move on, and immigrate to a different planet, Uvalde or whatever it's called.
mm-hmm.
I think that is cool, and I like that. And it's then a little bit weird, the whole thing where now we're in an alien movie. It kind of, maybe I'm in agreement with you guys that felt a little bit forced, almost. Like I actually enjoyed some of the stuff people bumped on. We'll come into this in a second, and I can explain why. But I felt like the connections, I wanted in some ways more connections to Prometheus and Covenant than I feel like we got. So even though I was vibing on a lot of the aesthetic choices, I wanted a bit more of the expansion of the lore. One other thing I'll just mention is I feel like Ridley Scott and James Cameron are, not primarily horror directors. They've of course done horror films, but James Cameron has done a lot of action films, and Aliens is an action movie. And it's interesting that, when somebody who's now a horror director, I think you could even say this is really the first time. I mean, I don't think we want to, do you want to say Fincher is a horror director? It's hard to, I don't think I would.
Well, I mean, I think the difference is that we didn't know who he was. I'm saying we broadly. I was, I think, 2 years old when that film came out. So it was a different set of circumstances it's about where they are in their trajectory, where Ridley Scott was very upfront about the fact that he was thinking of doing Tristan and Isolde as a follow-up to The Duelists in 1977. And then he saw Star Wars and he thought, well, I can't just do more beautiful, antiquated storytelling. There needs to be a sort of a heartbeat to the thing.
Yeah.
And so, this is perhaps the best impulses he's ever had as a straight up storyteller or dramatist is, Dan O'Bannon and Ron Shusett write the original screenplay, and it reads very much like a 50s sci-fi film. It reads like, for heaven's sakes, it came from outer space or something like that. And the beast with, not the beast with five fingers. There's an alien. There's a very specific movie about an alien that climbs aboard a spaceship and is like going through the levels trying to get them. It was made in 1958, I want to say. So Walter Hill and David Giler get a hold of this, and they think this isn't very good, but it's got a great scene, which is the chest bursting scene. So they take it and they polish it, and then they give it to Ridley Scott, who is, visual artist, commercial artist par excellence. Nobody has a better eye in the British cinema at that moment than he does. And he takes it and he completely gets rid of all the sensational stuff. He keeps the Walter Hill working class thing and basically just gets rid of everything that isn't like, okay, we're making a movie for adults now. We're going to make a film, we're continuing up from Stanley Kubrick and 2001: A Space Odyssey, and then we're making a haunted house thing, but we're not going to tell people that's what we're doing. We don't want anyone to know. And like famously, the trailer, when you first saw it in 78, 79, was just the egg cracking open. And it didn't even look like the egg in the movie. It just looked like an egg. And the slow, the what do you call that? The tagline, "In space, nobody can hear you scream." So nobody had any idea what it was. And so everybody was completely taken aback by that. So that's like a surprise on a surprise on a surprise. James Cameron had made The Terminator, so everybody basically knew what he was about. And Aliens is very much just a continuation of what he starts with Terminator. It's that crunchy cyberpunk thing. It's what, it's that kind of, it's stuff bursting out of skin and machine guns and all that, tech stuff. He loves that very much. And you see a return in all of the font and the computer screens and everything in this movie. They were very conscious about bringing all that back. And what's missing, frankly, is a bigger political dimension. Like, obviously the aliens are supposed to sort of be the Viet Cong in Aliens, but then they lose, and there's no sense of them having a personality beyond the sort of insect drive to breed and continue living. And then you get to 3, and at that point, and famously on set, I say famously way too much. It's not famous. David Fincher was a commercial director and a music video director. He had worked with Madonna. He had made a movie for Rick Springfield. And that was his first real feature thing, was this Rick Springfield concert film. And then on set, when David Giler had problems with the creative direction he was taking the movie, he would say, "Why are you listening to him? He's a shoe salesman." And so nobody knew what kind of a director David Fincher was. And I think it's fair to say that since then he hasn't made an outright horror film. So I don't know that you can call him that. I think more broadly, he's a genre director. He just happens to have the eye of, it's just a hyper competent sensationalist. He's got this great genre, this pulpy sense, but he directs it like a math major. He's incredible. And I think his best movies are the ones that feel a little throwaway on the surface. And then Jean-Pierre Jeunet and Mark Caro, who they bring in to do Resurrection, they weren't really horror directors either, so much as they were dystopia directors. Delicatessen and City of Lost Children are both movies set, let's say, sort of charitably in Terry Gilliam's Brazil. Mm-hmm. And and then Paul W.S. Anderson, same thing. He had made Event Horizon and Resident Evil, which are both horror movies, but he had also made Shopping and Mortal Kombat. So these are just genre people. The Strauss brothers, same thing. They had made the Skyline, which unfortunately is not very good, but then Liam O'Donnell took that franchise over, and it's been quite good since. Shout out Liam. And then Ridley takes it back. And by the time he came back to that, the only horror movie he had made in the meantime was Hannibal, which is a movie I really love. But that movie is about opera and the sort of tactile sensation of the finest things in life. I mean, there's a whole section about creating perfume in that. That's right out of Patrick, what's his name's book, Perfume Story of a Murderer, or, all the great arias that take over that, and the live theater that they see, and the art studies and everything. That's a movie about being an aesthete and how much that separates you from the rest of the world. And that's probably why the movie was critically not well received, but was extremely popular when it came out. I mean, not least because it was following up on Silence of the Lambs, which is a much more empathetic movie. So yeah, and then in the meantime, he had just made crime films and period pieces, and so yeah, there isn't really a horror guy who had done this. And Fede even has tried to branch out by literally making a David Fincher movie, which was Girl Who Kicked the Girl in the Spider's Web, which unfortunately is not a particularly compelling movie, but his images once more are very propulsive and very interesting. It's just that screenplay is nonsense, and who cares about Lisbeth Salander unless she's being played by either Noomi Rapace or Rooney Mara. So yeah, there's some confusion there, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it does feel like, with Fede's, coming into this now as, I think, as a bona fide horror guy, and it feels like a more straightforward horror film, and I think that to me actually hurts it a little bit, because I think the films, what I come to these films are, even though they are horror films, I come to them for something a little bit different, and I think that's one of the things that I sort of rubbed me a little bit the wrong way, which I like Alvarez's sensibilities. I think they're usually on the right track. I haven't really loved any of his movies, but I like, there's like all these little interesting bits in there, and again, the images are all very powerful. Okay, I want to ask you guys specifically about a couple things that people, took issue with in the film. So there were several sort of, to mention the fan service element, there were several moments of fan service in this film. And, chief among them, Andy, the android, saying to the xenomorph before he kills it, "Get away from her, you bitch." What did you guys think of that? I mean, so in those moments of fan service, I know, Scout, you were saying initially this was something that maybe bothered you a little bit. What did you think about that one in particular?
It had no business being there. I mean, I watched it twice to really get a sense of whether or not the things that I hated were being foregrounded in a way that I found agreeable. And I was just sitting there and I'm like, this is the purest of screenwriter logic. And I think they set themselves up the task of, how do we get to this moment? And so they very, very dimly broadcasted, but it's not like it's a part of the robot's personality that he doesn't know what the word bitch means. And getting yourself there, I just feel like, is so much labor to take away from what you're actually trying to do here, And I think if you had asked him, he would say, we're here to tell a story, right? Yeah. Like, you're not just here to remake something in someone else's image, although there is quite a bit of that. And I just felt let down every time. I felt like I was being kind of nudged by this screenplay to be like, remember that? I'm like, yeah, I do. That's why I'm sitting here in the theater. That's why I'm here, to see it, because I know what you're doing.
There's a title. It's called Alien.
It's called fucking Alien. I wasn't bored goddamn fucking yesterday. Everybody here knows it.
Yeah.
And the thing that was like even crazier is, in the theater, the one time I saw it in the bigger house, he says that and the whole audience starts applauding, and I'm like, oh, this is so sad. Like, is this really all we care about? And I say that, and like Deadpool's down the fucking hallway, and it's like, yeah, no, obviously this is all anybody gives a shit about, is being reminded of the stuff that you like. And it's like, I don't know, man, watch the thing on DVD if you like it so much. Like, I don't want to see new art to see old art. That's not why I like, obviously, like, if you go to a museum that has a permanent collection, you're going to run into the Matisse that you like, and that's fine, but it also changes collections and has new exhibitions and things like that. It seems very defeatist, ultimately, to set yourself the goal of retreading someone else's work, especially when, if you're Fede Alvarez, you're already very talented, and you have proven how talented you are, and you can make new stuff. His Evil Dead, there are makeup callbacks and visual cues, but it's not a movie where, they're not doing Bruce Campbell lines in that movie. They're making something else, something more thunderous and horrifying. I'm saying that the first Evil Dead is horrifying. It gave me nightmares. But other than it's, so, always forward is really all I can say. And I feel like he got so close, because it really does feel very, very personal. It's just, the idea of the planet without a sun, the mining planet without a sun, is like, that's very much a Latin American concern. That is a South American problem. and especially with a country like Uruguay, which was like a way station. It was a place where goods would go from Brazil to Europe and back and forth, and there was no consensus about what to do with the country, and there was a fucking military dictatorship, and the president of the country, who served from 2009 to, I don't even know, 2020 or something like that, he had been in jail for 15 years. He was part of the Tupamaros, which was a guerrilla group who had started like robbing banks and stuff to give money to the underclass in the 50s and 60s. And these were the people who wound up being, imprisoned and tortured because they wanted better for the working class, and to sort of prove that they wouldn't just stand by idly and be abused and exploited. And there's so much of that stuff in the movie, and I really wanted him to just sort of keep doubling down on that. Like, you've got this opportunity. Don't just give people what they want.
Yeah.
Make your version of it.
I totally agree. So let's we'll come back to some of the things people bumped up, but I just want to pick up on this thread because I think this is an important dimension of the film. So I saw somebody posted something on Twitter where they were like, Alien Romulus reminds us or sort of like reveals that the true villain was the corporation. And some people were like, wait a second.
Reveals.
What do you mean? Like, obviously, I think I was like, everybody was saying that. And so, okay, so this film, clearly has an anti-corporation bent to it that is a standard throughout all of the Alien films. But so let's talk a little bit about how that has materialized in the course of this film. So you've already mentioned that there's this very personal element to it with the fact, with Fede Alvarez's background coming from Uruguay, and that, how does that play out in the film, and how is that embedded in this film in particular? Do you want to say more on that, Scout?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I was so heartened when it started because it's the first film that has given you a real glimpse of the ecosystem in which this whole saga has played out. And to show you that though, like basically when you first meet the crew of the Nostromo, it's a mining operation. They're bitching about pay. They're miserable, they're sick, they're not well, the food sucks, everything's terrible. And it's like, yeah, no, that was everybody, especially an English guy with a working class dad, coming from the dismal mining towns and shipping towns and fishing villages and stuff like that of England. That was all just what people understood about the way that an economy is sort of propped up. And certainly it didn't get any better under Thatcher. And the fact that most of these movies are shot at Pinewood, which, in a sort of a like local boy makes good thing, Ridley and Tony Scott bought a controlling interest in Pinewood Studios in 1995, I want to say. So they sort of really seized the means of production for themselves in that way and became, permanent fixtures in the British film landscape. And so I love the idea that this started on a grotesque planet. You never see the sun. There's just this like oppressive atmosphere, and you're literally seeing canaries being brought into mines.
Yeah.
That was a very lovely touch, even if it was a slightly dodgy effect. But it's like, yeah, no, they mean it. And, just like the kind of misery of everybody around them to the point where they would consider doing this very dangerous thing just to get off the planet. And I'm like, it's relatable. It is like, I saw some nonsense, and you should never, ever take anything that you see from an account with 100 followers seriously. But somebody was like, the first one was much more relatable because it's just like a bad job instead of a planet that's like chock full of pollution. I was like, clearly you did not grow up in the favela. Like you were like, this stuff means something to someone. Just because it doesn't mean something to you doesn't mean that it's not extremely meaningful for this stuff to be on every screen in America right now. Mm-hmm. And so, they get the idea of childbirth, that you're trying to, the Isabella Merced's character trying to give birth to a child on a better planet, and so that they can see the sun growing up. And that's the sort of, the flashback that Kaylee Spaney's character keeps having. And, just that it's turned these guys slightly feral and monstrous towards each other because everything sucks. And when you hate your job and you hate your life, you're going to take it out on the people closest to you.
Yeah.
And I just loved, the sort of the cutthroat thing where they can't take the robot on the thing, and that like her life is so miserable and she can't even really trust the boyfriend character. So she's just completely thrown all of her hopes into this android. I was like, this is great. This is great. character stuff. This is drama. I already understand every single bit of the design. 15 minutes in, I had no questions. I had like all these, sort of great things that I was imagining that were being left unsaid, but I wasn't like, wait, what are they doing? Who is this? Like it was very efficient. And a lot of it is because it's all rooted in poverty. And, coming to you from my basement apartment right now, certainly I understand what that's like.
The other dimension of the setting, of the setup, is that these characters. So the characters here are Rain, Kaylee Spaney, Andy, the android, her sort of adopted brother, and then Tyler, Kay, Bjorn, and Navarro. Those are the sort of main.
We have to briefly say that it is just wrong that there's a man named Tyler in space. That name should not have hopped the planet. Tyler should remain an Earth name.
Yeah, it's true that we have Rain, and Andy as android makes a lot of sense.
Android makes sense.
Yeah.
It's
but
cute,
yeah,
but
Tyler
it's
it's so
Navarro's
so
a cool
pedestrian.
name.
Navarro's a cool name.
I like how they introduce her where she just has like she's eating like a Twizzler or something.
Okay,
They're like,
yeah.
Navarro
she's got,
caught
like,
that, and she
Gross
does a little
space food.
yeah, and she just does a little nod, like she's like, yep.
And, what I think is interesting is, so they're all younger. This is they feel a lot younger than the characters we've met before in this franchise, and they're also much more impoverished, and there's no adult figures around. They feel like kids with no parents, because the parents are all dead or they're working, or who knows.
I think they're all dead.
So
at this point.
they've sort of banded together, and some of them are blood related and some of them aren't. And so I think it's sort of a found family movie or chosen family movie, and then they've kind of formed this bond between one another, a bond based in survival. And in particular with Andy and Rain, it's like an adopted sort of sibling bond where they're sort of looking out for one another. But they're not in a position to, it's in a way the film sort of wants to test those bonds and to see how strong they can really be in the face of the more strict bonds would be the bond between Kay and her soon to be offspring, as it's called, which is a biological bond, but one that's monstrous. So I think it's setting up this dichotomy between the kind of found family, which is one of ideally support bonds which are tested, but then also of a kind of more monstrous biological relation between Kay and her mutant child. And so and it makes sense that in a situation where you have a corporation, which is the Weyland-Yutani Corporation, which is basically exploiting these people's labor, in this, I guess they're in like some sort of mining colony or whatever, exploiting the labor of these people, that they are going to find whatever means they have of pushing back against that, which will be to form, bonds with one another and, try to have their own kind of fraternity. And actually that is a touch point with Alien 3, actually, now that I think about it. So Alien 3, you have the prison planet. We have all of the guys there who have decided to bond together. We've learned that the planet as a prison has been basically decommissioned, and everyone is left except for the 25 dudes who took this religion seriously and took the vow of celibacy, and they decided to stay. And so they've been bonded together. They're kind of a family in its own way too. And I guess in each movie you have these kind of, the shipmates have a kind of, tie in this way, but I feel like this is the one that makes it the most explicit, and I did appreciate that. I thought that was a nice touch.
Yeah, I was trying to think if there are any biological reproduction relationships that don't go horribly wong in the Alien franchise.
Right,
I don't think so. And of course, Ripley adopts Newt. Like that's the only sort of mother-daughter, mother-child relationship that isn't, bastardized, curdled, turned into something monstrous, taken away by the monsters, taken away by, Weyland-Yutani, and it's a chosen family again. I
think, too, it's interesting that if you think of one of the central anxieties of the Alien films is the anxiety, in particular male anxiety, about reproduction and the act of reproducing and the inability to self-reproduce, and how this drives a lot of these characters to do things which ultimately prove to be disastrous. It is interesting that in our drive to reproduce, the men primarily create these artificial beings, and so we are constantly being related to these artificial beings, which have been sort of, non-procreatively created. Like they're not born of an act of procreation. They're born out of a synthetic, synthesization of or an externalization of our need or desire to create. But then what is created in these cases of these artificial creations is something that turns out to be, in many cases, quite monstrous. So the enemy in the films often turns out to be not just the corporation, but it then becomes literalized in the form of the android. I'm thinking in particular of Ian Holmes' character in what's his character's name? Why am I blanking on his name?
He's Ash.
Ash in the first Alien, and then David in the Prometheus Covenant movies. And then in this film, it complicates that relationship because, and this is the first time I've seen this in an alien film, where there's a real friendship between the android character and one of the other characters, and it is a familial relationship. Andy and Rain's relationship, to me, was the strongest point of the film. I felt like that relationship and the sort of the ebbs and flows and the complexities of their relationship and the difficulties of maintaining it through all of the things that they're being forced to deal with, I thought was the most compelling. So, Scout, you said you agreed. So, what were your thoughts on this thought about sort of our relationship as humanity to artificial creations, and then in particular, Andy and Rain?
Well, I mean, so to use a contemporaneous example of this sort of death drive of creation and creativity, just look at AI and how overnight that went from, this kind of thing that they were beta testing in, predictive text on your email or whatever, to suddenly every corporation on Earth is plunging millions into partnerships with AI companies. Like I saw this firsthand because of my Vimeo account. Suddenly there are copyright flags on things that there never used to be because they're partnering with AI companies. And the more that they have the idea that they're going to be creating things out of whole cloth, the less they want things that remind people of the abundance of actual art out there. And so, you don't want to be able to like click from one video that's playing a Lou Reed song to click to an AI video that has the computer's best approximation of a Lou Reed song. You just want all these things to appear new to begin with. And so, what it comes down to, and you did hint at this, is this sort of castration anxiety among male creators and this sort of very bullshit bowdlerized notion of genius and the things that you have to do to prove that you are one. And you see it all throughout the Alien movies. The things that the male characters all up and down this, and the corporation isn't ever given it's given a face in eventually in the form of like Guy Pearce or Robert Joy in Alien versus Predator Requiem or whatever. But initially it's a female voice, and you can always basically tell that if it's a female voice that a man programmed it. Like calling it mother is like so Freudian in that way. And there's the and then the sort of living artificial intelligence on the ship that they didn't want anybody to know about, which has this very like grim coding of like, he when his artificiality is revealed, there's this sort of like sexual assault coding to the whole incident, where she's waking up having been attacked, and he's suddenly going like trying to kill her, and she's having this very like penetrative attack on her mouth through the magazine. It's very, very carefully chosen imagery, and it's really horrifying. And then, you get to Alien 3, and the whole thing is this tug of war between prisoners on the one hand who have taken a vow of celibacy and who have double Y chromosomes. They go out of their way to say that they're like extra male. And the company that wants to force Ripley to have this pregnancy in order to give a birth to a queen, in order to continue the cycle of reproduction. And that's the tug of war in that movie, and that's why that movie is so wonderfully grim, is because you have people who have nothing to live for, and all of the familial bonds that you're talking about between them, having found religion at the same time, they immediately crumble because a woman shows up and they're like, oh, I remember that. Like, I remember all the urges. And then suddenly they have to remember all this stuff, and by the end they have no more clear relationship to, the version of God that Charles S. Dutton's character gives to them than they had at the outset. They're there basically for each other, and that's really it. And even that doesn't really seem like enough, but it's more to tie them together to thwart a company which has no human organic face and really only has this very vague, disgusting, undefined goal of the destruction of the universe, and using these things for weapons. And that's really what it is that having been at the receiving end of the horrors of corporate malfeasance in the form of them working a prison owned by a company at the on the planet fucking Zeptron or whatever, you're on the fucking, you're in the far reaches of space, and you still have this sense of corporate hierarchy, and they're calling the one guy a company man, in Alien 3 the whole way through, and it's just it's so fascinating and bleak that, but also accurate, that we have imagined Fiorina 161, a prison planet 77 light years away, and there's still prisoners, and there's still people at the bottom of the food chain, and there's still forced labor, and there's still all this stuff, because it is, what is the quote? It's easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of labor. There's like a weird comfort impulse among creators to create the bleakest imaginable future, because it has to be worse than what you're living through right now. And then in this movie, I think really the reproductive stuff to me was a little forced, because if you really wanted to tell that story, then your lead should have been pregnant. Having a secondary character that you don't get to know become this very last minute third act gag felt to me rushed. And I heard personally from somebody who had pretty traumatic experience around birth, say that it was jarring and offensive in the way that it felt very shoehorned in there. And I couldn't help but agree that ultimately the movies are based around the idea of birth as an unnatural thing, and that's fine. That's the covenant that you sort of, poor choice of words, but that you agree upon when you see these movies. That the big scare in the first movie is a birth from an unnatural place, a birth out of a man, something that cannot be achieved naturally without the the intervention of this sort of horrible miracle of science. And so to continue to do this thing that sort of splits the difference between that original scare and trying to push it in these new places, and obviously the third, the birth in the final act of Romulus is very much a retread of the birth in the final act of Resurrection, and it just felt like a lack of originality there. Again, it felt like it had nothing whatsoever to do with any of the subtextual track that was laid in order to get to where you are in the sort of horrific environs of the spaceship. And furthermore, the whole point of the movie being called Romulus and referring to the myth of Romulus and Remus is that there's supposed to be two. So what does giving birth to one thing have to do with giving birth to the other thing? That you're creating this, and it's like, oh well, it's an alien, but it's not. But it's none of it bore a close enough resemblance to anything else to me to find that to be a particularly satisfying piece of text.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is. I think it's a bit muddy when we get to that stuff. I just want to pick up on one thing. So on the artificiality bit and the AI stuff. So one of the things that really irked a number of people in reviews and so on was the CGI recreation of Ian Holm and the use of of that, where Ian Holm has died in 2020 and of course and Alvarez has said he's spoke to the family and so on. Okay, but there's something undeniably gross about using someone's in this way, their likeness in this way. Okay, now I'm going to now defend this. I'm going to defend it as a meta-narrative comment on on basically what's happening in the film. So, the character that Ian Holm's likeness plays is Rook, and he is very much a villain in this film. You're not supposed to like this character. he's unnatural, right? He's artificial, and he's
got like a disemboweled.
Yeah,
sense.
he's disemboweled and all that. But he's very clearly artificial.
Yeah.
He's a total company thing, right? He's a creation of a faceless corporation that only cares about making money and so on. What does that remind us of? The thing you just said, Scout, as these AI companies that want to take Scarlett Johansson's voice against her will and use it for, right, for example, the voice of ChatGPT 6 or whatever, like I think by making him so uncannily, a recreation of Ian Holm in this way that calls into question whether this was even done with consent or even could be done with consent. I think what it does is it meta-narratively makes us have that reaction that we're supposed to have to the character, but it makes us have it to the representation of the character. It makes us think, gross, I hate this, the representation of the character because it was done in this gross way. But of course, that's textual too. You're supposed to hate this thing, which is this unnatural representation, embodiment of all the evils of the corporation. So I actually think it could be defended on grounds that make it like sort of dovetail these two aspects of our relationship to this artificiality. And I actually thought that was kind of cool. Now, that said, in Alien 3, you have a Lance Henriksen, he replays Bishop in a various way, but he also, the downed Bishop android shows up in that. And it's just like a puppet. It's basically just a puppet that's like being manipulated. And it looks amazing. It looks so tactile and real because it just is. It's just an animatronic puppet. I don't feel the same, I feel this, it's gross and weird, but I don't feel the same reaction to it as I do to this CGI creation. There's something
like a deep fake.
It's like a deep fake, and there's something gross about it in particular because that these people are like these money grubbers are rubbing their little paws together because they're just thinking, oh, great, I could just replace humans entirely and just have to do it all with this AI stuff, which is not the case with the tactile thing, which you needed a person to form it and manipulate it and that kind of thing. Now, granted, this was CGI, so it was not AI. It was animated by
Well, it was
humans.
AI.
Wait, it was?
There was AI components.
Okay, there were AI components. Okay, but I mean, it was
the voice.
Presumably it was animated though in part by humans who do, people who do CGI and that kind of thing. So it's not fully, but you are reaching this point where, and I think that does partly explain why I feel very different about the Lance Henriksen puppet than I do with Ian Holm. But anyway,
yeah, and especially when Rook is going off on like, you humans, like you keep dying, you're so fragile, we can't control you very well. It's easy to control computer programs. Like you can see like people are like, we could just replace everything with AI, that we wouldn't have to deal with
exactly.
all this
And
stuff.
the humans are unpredictable in ways that are irritating to the machines because they're not acting rationally, at least the way the machines think of it. Something we can come back to later. But anyway, okay, Scott, what did you think of that? What did you think in general of the CGI Ian Holm?
I thought it was horrifying. It was just awful. I went to the bathroom. I couldn't look at it. I thought it was so gross. I'm like, yeah, I know Ridley Scott, and we went and got the permission and all that stuff. But presuming to know the wishes of a dead man, unless you have it in writing, to me is odd. The strangest thing to me about it is what single Alien fan saw that and was like, God, that makes sense. We got to have him. Like, fucking what? That guy?
Yeah. You could have used anyone.
You could have used anybody. And frankly, it just sort of hammers home that there really shouldn't be this kind of Pavlovian, franchise thing where you see it like something and you're like, oh, yes, this of course reminds you of whatever. Like, if you had brought Harry Dean Stanton back to life, would it have been any less weird? And also, it doesn't really make any sense in the context where, like, in Alien 3, there's a certain sense to be had in the fact that they're trying to convince Sigourney Weaver's character to trust this robot so they make it look like her old android. That's, the logic behind whether or not they would have been able to do that in the time that it takes them to do that, who the fuck knows? But in the case of this, nobody knows on the Nostromo that Ash is an android. Why would you then risk that by having several different androids who look exactly like him on other missions doing the same thing? It just doesn't make any sense. And so, I had a hard time compartmentalizing it narratively, and I had an even harder time compartmentalizing it on a sort of ethics level. And just furthermore, you didn't need it. You just truly, like the first act of that movie exists to tell you that they're fucked. You don't need this other thing to also hammer it home and be this Greek chorus all the way through. Because if anything, it takes it takes away the sort of the fun of the creation of an atmosphere of hopelessness. If you constantly have this fake British accent talking down to them the entire way through, like the Red Queen in the Resident Evil movies, it just, I don't, you ascend to this level of cartoonishness that I don't think this film was designed to support.
Can I ask you this? So Scout, so what if it had been a puppet? So somebody, makes the puppet. It looks like Ian Holm. It's not, and suppose they just got some actor to voice it. So it kind of sounds like Ian Holm. But it's just bearing his likeness. Would it have felt as gross?
I don't know that it would have felt exactly as gross, but it would have felt just as perfunctory.
I agree.
I think about like, do you remember that terrible Sky Captain in the World of Tomorrow? Where in the final act, the villain is revealed to be computer-generated Laurence Olivier for some reason. And it's just the whole thing, again, it's just why in the world you're making a movie for 20th Century Fox and Sky Free. You have more money than you know what to do with. What on earth is stopping you from hiring an actor to come up with a new performance?
Totally.
And writing a new character.
Yeah, or having something.
That's the thing where it breaks down to me is I understand wanting to deal with existing things, but if you have nothing new for them to do, then really all you're doing is cribbing from other people's screenplays and notebooks and every other thing. And it just strikes me as anathema to the idea of making your own Alien movie.
I'm totally with you about all that. And I mean, this is why I think we could probably spend 6 hours going back and forth about how much we hate The Rise of Skywalker for exactly this reason.
Terrible fucking movie.
But anyway, so
don't do it.
We're not going to do it. We're not going to do it. But I guess I am curious. Like, I do find it kind of curious that and we both share the reaction that like the CGI version of it is, and maybe because it was using AI and stuff, is somehow grosser to us than if they had recreated him with like just, a prosthetic. I find that interesting. I don't quite know what it is, but I have a hunch that it is tapping into our anxieties about the kind of encroaching artificiality that we just innately are just repulsed by. There's something repulsive to us as humans, which I find really interesting.
Shouldn't we, maybe there's something to the idea of exploring further why it is we're so grossed out by it, but I think that like you and I, everybody in this Zoom call understands that part of our horror at it is that it's happening every day. Yeah. We're seeing new boundaries being pushed by companies that do not have our best interests at heart. Yeah. Where AI is, what's the tweet about it? It's like it draws you the worst thing you've ever seen in your life, and every time it does it, a lake disappears. Like that's the environmental impact of using AI servers is nightmarish and still being studied and horrible, and none of it looks good. There isn't a moment of that character where you're looking at it and you think, oh, it looks just like him. The entire time it's a disgusting facsimile, which admittedly, as you say, it's meant to be. But I really do think that if we don't crack down on this stuff right away, we're asking for trouble. I really do think that you need to be loudest as possible when presented with such a horrifying visage and reject it out of hand. Yeah. Because it comes with questions that to me have absolutely nothing to do with the creation of art.
Yeah,
you think about, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, please continue.
I was just like, you think about the waves of movements in filmmaking. It is still a relatively young art form in the grand scheme of human creation, and you think about the battles that people have had to do for critical acceptance or to buck the trends of a national cinema or whatever. Like I think about the headaches suffered by somebody like completely randomly Peter Greenaway to try to push cinema into a new realm, a new formal space with the image completely unbound by what we understand about even the square frame or the rectangular frame, and the introduction of text and images upon images, and just this layering of and people really hated it, and they really took against it because he was trying to push film away from traditional narrative cinema. And I think about the fact that they have decided to pick a battle inside of a system that wasn't done evolving, where narrative cinema continues to change and can continue to change, provided we are all welcoming to the idea that narrative cinema is not the end, that we haven't, there was no movie where we perfected it. There's no film where it's like, oh, Lawrence of Arabia, we did it as good as it's ever going to do, so let's just keep doing this forever because we figured it out. There was no movie where you can say they finally got it all right. Even whatever my favorite films are, there is always new ground to be covered. And so to me, it's extremely self-defeating to think that really what this particular version of a film artifact was missing was this really ghoulish resurrection of somebody. Like it just it feels like suspending our understanding of our own mortality for a completely nonsensical end. To do things that in no way have yet to improve a single film that they've been used in.
I'm with you that we need to resist at all costs the encroaching AI revolution or whatever we want to call it coming for human created art.
Hostile takeover.
We could talk more about this later. But I do also want to talk about just in general some of the psychoanalytic readings of the Alien franchise.
Oh, do you? Do we have time for this?
In particular, it's not something that this film is that engaged with, but it is something that the Alien films in general are engaged with. Mm-hmm. So anyway, Laura, do you want to talk a little bit about this stuff that we read some stuff from Barbara Creed?
Oh my gosh.
Who wrote this interesting book called The Monstrous Feminine.
Oh my gosh. I don't know that I'm prepared to summarize this, honestly.
No, we could talk a little bit about,
in my cold
I could
voice.
throw some concepts out just because I think they're interesting. So Creed basically.
I say go for it. I say get in the weeds.
Well, she's
sick and get in the weeds.
Yeah. she hypothesizes that the notion of the archaic mother, which comes from Freud, which is supposed to be sort of like this pre-phallic beginning to all life. It's kind of interesting. It's this interesting notion that comes back again and again in a lot of films. We just did Altered States on the podcast, and Altered States is a film where a guy is trying to find God by finding the beginning of life.
By going back by getting in a womb space and birthing himself backwards in time until he
back further and further to find
is an ape.
Born ceaselessly back our backs against the currents. Yes,
exactly. Yeah. And anyway, it's this thing that comes up again and again, but of course it's haunting the Alien universe in many ways.
Yeah.
One way is that it's, that the ship is called Mother. We have this kind of recurring image of an anxiety about childbirth and so on. But here's one kind of interesting thing that I learned from reading Creed's book. So in Freud, one of the extreme forms of the primal fantasy which drives some anxiety is the idea of observing parental intercourse while one is still an unborn baby in the room. That is, observing your own creation or insemination. Mm-hmm. And this comes from the introductory letters on psychoanalysis. So I thought that was really interesting that like this for Freud was he thought this was a source of anxieties. Well, it also, I think, is a driving force of fascination in the Alien movies. So in Prometheus in particular, Peter Weyland thinks that the cure for aging will be found by finding his creator. He wants to find the engineers. He wants to find the source of human life. And I think, again, it's like we want to look at the thing that we fear, namely our own insemination or inception. We have to find it and stare at it. Unfortunately, now Creed then says that her reading of the Alien film, this is, I thought, kind of interesting, is like the character of Kane, who's John Hurt's character. He looks into the egg. And so this is for her the visualization of this image of like looking into your own insemination. And what happens? He gets inseminated by the alien. So he becomes, he sort of has to face the monster, and then he ultimately like becomes his own sort of parent birthing the creature. So that's like one of her, like, she's like, okay, this is an important image because it's like you're like confronting your.
Well, also important to note as well that when the alien bursts forth, it's the robot that gets wrong the mythic foregrounding of it. He calls it Cain's son. He doesn't say Abel, which is to say its brother, which is to say something else created from this person. There's this biblical underpinning, but a robot doesn't understand it because the robot isn't raised with religion in the same way.
You know, now that you say that, actually, you could also think of it as, you're right that Cain and Abel, of course, the character's name is Cain, but you could also think of it as an inversion of the Adam and Eve myth because it comes out of the rib. It's effectively, and it looks like a freaking rib when it comes out. You know, it's like a rib that is like born. Yeah, no, I love how it like looks around.
It does a look around, and then he dashes
and he takes off. One of my favorites.
And there's so much biblical imagery and talk all through Prometheus and Covenant. There's the nail being used as a murder weapon in Covenant, and you know, there's the whole idea of for heaven's sake, but you know, like those are deeply religious movies. Billy Crudup's character quoting scripture and everything. It's, you know, trying to bring this concept of God into places where there hasn't been religion. It's the perfect folly, basically, and they're punished for this.
So Creed then thinks, okay, so Creed's view, I don't know if
Creed. You love Barbara Creed now.
Look, I don't know if I agree with this. I'm not a literary theorist. I can dabble in this stuff, but this is not like my area of expertise. But anyway, Creed's hypothesis then is that this desire and fear of the archaic mother is fundamentally a desire to return to the original womb. What is that? For her, it's a desire for non-differentiation. It's effectively a desire to undifferentiate oneself, to like go back to this space where you are, I guess, one with the mother or something before you've like broken off. And what I don't totally understand.
Until you are black goo, you're in the goo.
I guess, I don't know. So it's a desire for non-differentiation.
Well, it's anti-semen, it should be said, that the robots bleed white and the aliens bleed black in that way.
Yeah, and the goo is black. Yeah. And okay. So anyway, I don't know quite what to make of this. Like that. Like first of all, it's of course the thing that I find compelling is, and I think the alien films do this well, is the thing we're fascinated by is also the thing we most fear. That seems right. This seems very plausible that there's that kind of thing. But then I don't totally know if I'm on board because I don't totally understand this idea of non-differentiation that we're trying to get back to. But she thinks, I mean, one way to think of it is it's an obliteration of the self. Now, that would be actually kind of interesting. She doesn't go this way, but you could think of, like, what are the aliens? They're kind of all the same. I mean, the xenomorphs. There's different, of course, species or whatever, but like the xenomorphs are, once they kind of get going with the face huggers, they all look basically the same.
Yeah, it's like asexual replication, like reproduction. Right. Like it's the manner in which they're like penetrating the humans, it feels sexual, but it's just asexual reproduction.
Yeah.
They're just
cloning themselves basically. Yeah. And then they're a hive mind. That's the other interesting thing. So it reduces to this like hive mind, non-differentiation. They kind of all do whatever it needs to be done by the hive. They're not individuals or selves the way that we are, where we are like people who are self-determinative and have desires and have personalities and so on. So you might think like, yeah, and the goo is a kind of, maybe this is this primordial thing from which all of this, spills, I guess. And I wonder if that is maybe a way of thinking about this fear of like, we want to return back to this like oneness with maybe the universe, but then it's also a fear because what would it be to be that would be to have the obliteration of all yourself, all the characteristics that distinguish you from anyone else. And maybe that is horrifying, that's one of the things, potentially one of the reasons why we fear death. Death is the kind of nullification of of our conscious experience, of our differentiation from others and our perspective on the world. And so maybe in a way, this is some way of Barbara Creed tying it all back to the fundamental fear of death. I don't know. But anyway, there was this psychoanalytic gritty read. Do you want to add more to this, Laura, or I don't know?
Yeah, no, I mean, I found myself what got us started on this is because I found this book. Was because I think when
Laura's like, we got to read Barbara Creed.
we got to read. I was like, listen, Barbara Creed.
We love Barbara Creed in this house.
No, I found myself really like focused in. I think because there were certain parts of the movie that weren't working for me and other parts that were. I was really focusing in more on like the imagery and how sexual the imagery is and the motherhood tropes.
Like, are you thinking in particular the cocoon, the vagina cocoon?
The vagina cocoon that like drips vagina cocoon acid on him and then he like stabs up into it. And I was just like, at that moment, I was like, Fede Alvarez is going all the way and I'm appreciating it. You know, I was just like, he's going for it. You know, that's my guy. Like, we know he can do it because you've seen his other movies and we know that he is not going to hold back on that stuff. And so I was just like, I think I was like, that was one of my fist pump moments where I was
Laura was going crazy in the theater. At 1 p.m. empty theater.
Yeah, I was just like, yeah. The guy like with his phone out, literally filming the movie next to me.
God.
Anyway, but I think, I don't know. I read the psychoanalysis stuff. I'm not smart enough for it. I know I'm not smart enough for it, but it doesn't ring true to me in a lot of ways. But I think like with these movies, all of these movies are very concerned about procreation and about sex and like fascinated by it and horrified by it. And I don't know what's going on with Giger, but he seemed to be really concerned with it as well.
Concerned is the right word.
Concerned.
Giger's got some concern.
I don't know. I just think
He was
like
a concerned individual.
he's concerned. I don't know. I think like the way I was thinking about it was just that like the way that we create life as people, you know, sexual reproduction the way we do it is messy. And like in some ways, like physically, bodily, it's gross. And like the process of birthing is like many horror movies have covered with gyno horror or whatever, is that it's some of elements are really abject, horrifying moments where you feel like disconnected from your body when you are pregnant and when you are giving birth. And like there are some real moments of horror.
Yeah, you're like alienated from your own body because there's this this thing that's not you that's there.
Yeah. And who has
and your body's trying to kill.
Your body's trying to kill and you have to suppress your immune system in order to like not kill it. And it has like its own opinions that like toothpaste is disgusting. I couldn't brush my teeth for a month because like my baby was like, we don't like that. But you know, and like the whole lactation thing is crazy too. Like, you know, one day I wasn't making milk and then I was, you know, and there's that scene where in this movie as well. But I think also the ways in which we create life is messy emotionally as well. And that's the thing that like horrifies the synthetics, right? They want to, they love how clean the xenomorphs do things, how pure and simple things are. They just make more life. They don't like get messed up in the feelings of it. They just go. And
they're efficient.
They're efficient. And like, that's what that's what like a corporation wants to do. That's what the synthetics want to do. That's not how we do it. That's not how we make life. And the way that the xenomorphs do it, you know, is it's efficient, but it's not necessarily that creative.
It's soulless. And non-creative. Yeah, exactly.
And in some ways, in order to create something new, like The Offspring, you need us messy humans and the lady wombs in order to do it.
There's a writer named Scott Ashland who came up with the idea that aliens reproduce haplodiploidally, which means that males develop from unfertilized eggs and females develop from fertilized eggs.
Okay.
Which explains the sort of gaps in that there's only one queen per colony and things like that.
Okay.
It's common in insects. It's also got another name called, Arenotoki, which is very strange. But anyway, there's this sort of the beautiful scientific, mysterious side of it meeting with this sort of arch religious side is part of what makes the series so enduring and strange. It's why I love 3 so much, is because everything you're saying about your body trying to kill the thing inside of you is what fails Ripley in the third movie, where she desperately wants this thing inside of her to die, but she cannot convince any of the men to kill her and the thing inside of her because, everybody has their own reasons. They're afraid to do it, or they're afraid that they'll get in trouble, or they won't be able to make right with God, or they think they need her for something. She cannot get an abortion to save her soul in this film. And I think having that performance, and she is fully up to the challenge of presenting that, and wearing that on her face, the constant awareness of the fact that her body is currently at war with her mind, and her own desires is a big part of why I keep returning to that film, is that there's this atmosphere of doom, this medieval, nobody knows how the world works anymore sort of ignorance in these caves and tunnels, which are right out of Plato and myth and every other thing. And so they've fully returned to, the sort of the primitive state in which mankind was, first born. And now they have to suddenly be brought up to, what we would call now the 21st century understanding of morality and femininity and all this stuff, when they've been completely isolated from all of that for the last however many years. And they've become this sort of, like the alien, this thing, this one mind where they've all got the same haircut and the same outfits. They've become one organism, and need to be shepherded in the same way.
Yeah, I think this connection that we're all drawing between the kind of nullification of the self and corporations, and the connection to the sort of cloniness of the aliens and the sameness of the aliens is, I think, really important. And I think that's why I think the most important pivot point of this film, of Alien Romulus, is when Rain goes back to save Andy. Because by all marks, every rational, thing, if you're just like self-interest, save yourself, is get the fuck out of there. The robot has effectively betrayed you, because he's at that point juiced up with the Rook programming, and this makes no sense from a kind of rational point of view. But nonetheless, she goes back because she loves him. It's her love for him that makes her do this thing, which is inexplicable by the calculus of rationality to the aliens, to the corporation, to the androids, to the artificial beings. But that's what makes us people. I think the film is trying to say that's the thing that makes us human, is that we act in these kind of unpredictable, seemingly irrational ways, which are nonetheless expressive of who we are and the commitments we've undertaken, the things that matter to us. And her going back to do that is ultimately, the thing that, because that's what matters to her. That's what matters to me as a viewer, is their relationship. More than I want her to survive, I want her and him to be able to be, to reconcile. And they are able to reconcile, right? Because she's able to change out the programming and then, be like, I want you to, what is it? The new directive, do what's best for us. And they like, okay, now we're on the same team and all that again. Great. That's like what I think as a viewer, I wanted most of all in the film. And again, why I was speaking about that being the thing that resonated the most with me about this film is their relationship. And I think that's a real point of, that's where to me, that's a high point of the film, because it connects this broader theme of, over and over, we're hearing Rook and the corporation be like, this is stupid. You humans are dumb. You can't survive in space. And you're like, damn, maybe humans, maybe we should just give up. Like maybe, at this point, maybe like the aliens are a superior being. And then you're like, no, they're not. We are good because of the very things you're pointing out about us, about our flaws. That's what makes us good. And notice that those flaws are things you don't have. And that's what makes you not, those are flaws for you, right? Like you can't reproduce, you can't love, right? You can't, have a genuine personality and so on. So anyway, I loved that part of the film.
And so much of the movies, has this sort of push and pull between very human, very mangy, very emotional reactions to bigger questions being met with, as you say, this sort of corporate ideology, which of course, in Scott's terms, is directly conflated with fascism. where he is very, very, there's a little bit of it to the Ian Holm performance in Alien, but certainly there's a lot of it in Michael Fassbender's performance in Prometheus and Covenant, where he's literally self-styled after T.E. Lawrence, who was a horrifying colonizer who at various points, suggested gassing tribes and things like this because they knew that they had the technology. And so what you've got here is essentially a reproduction in the case of almost every man v. android ideological clash in these movies is Derrida looking at Heidegger's Nazism and wondering what the hell happened, and like splitting his whole thing into the four threads. It is the knot of the braid and the essence of technology, and I'm going to forget the other two, but the discourse of animality. And those two things completely, again, the knot of the braid, the things that cannot be pulled apart from the essence of human nature, and also the sense of looking for causality and the beautiful refutation of causality when she stops the elevator to go back for her robot, because she thinks that there is a way to restore the humanity to this person that she, well, not even a person, but that's the beauty of it, is looking for causality, looking for the root of humanity in essence, which is what Guy Pearce is looking for in Prometheus, is the beginning of the understanding of human beings. And she has found it in this. And I wish they'd made a bigger deal out of that philosophically. It becomes this very sort of pat 80s, when you were describing initially the sort of found family of children thing, my first thought immediately went to the Goonies, which is a movie I fucking hate. But that's exactly what it is. And so I really think that in selling the movie as this kind of film of misfits in space, you do undercut the philosophical reaches of these films and the very the kind of writhing gooey text at the center of these films and the way that they speak to each other. And I think in spite of itself, the film does reach out and continue some of these threads and bring them along, but I really think it could have gone even further. But then how long did it take for consensus to shift on Prometheus and Covenant that now these are movies that it's okay to like? So I understand why they didn't do it. I understand why they made it a lot more palatable, or did what they thought would be more palatable. But you can see in this as you were talking about with this sort of the horror at the gynecological image, there's so much loaded up already by all of the imagistic threads that this series has given us up to this point, that just by reaching out for them and pulling up this, that, and the other, you're going to have this buffet of symbols and meanings and images that do speak to you. And I really wish that they had had the courage to sort of continue to double down on this stuff and to not try to specifically give us things that they, that seems more easily understood.
Yeah, like that image was of the vagina was like my fist pumping moment instead of like, get away from her, you bitch.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, totally. No. Well, it's also cool. I was
like, that's in the spirit of this. Of
it
this,
totally
of
is.
These movies.
Totally
very much.
Yeah,
very
totally
much.
Is. Totally is.
With a very Fede Alvarez spin on it.
Goo it up.
The sort of yonic terror of his movies.
Yeah, like this man, I will, the turkey baster, though.
The turkey baster.
That will never leave my brain as long as I live.
So perfectly disgusting. Yeah,
totally. Guys, okay, so we've talked through Romulus. Now, I want to end this thing with a trivia quiz. Okay?
Oh, goodness.
So Laura didn't know but I've been doing trivia quizzes at the end, and I don't tell you. But now I'm going to...
I just want to tell you that I'm in between my Dayquil and NyQuil.
You guys are playing on the same team. All right. So,
I'm doing
same team. Don't worry, I'm right there with you.
Okay,
great.
Scout's feeling it too. Everybody's sick. Scout,
great.
Go to cowspod.com. You'll need to have the website for our...
Holy shit, I gotta do things?
You'll need to have it up because you'll see why.
From our previous episode?
Yes.
I'm gonna need it too.
Laura,
I don't know it. I don't know what we talked about.
All right. Okay. So
I don't remember yesterday.
Okay.
All right.
I'm on the website.
Okay.
So basically, I'm going to ask you first question is a true or false question. Okay.
Okay.
And it is this. One of the actors with speaking lines in this film has appeared in a film that we have previously covered on this podcast. True or false? And if you think it's true, what is the actor and what is the film? Okay, so we've got a bunch of young actors in this. Now, without looking at those actors, right?
Yeah.
Looking at the list of films we've covered on Cal's Pod, which is about 120 now.
Oh, good God.
Would you have a guess as to which actor with speaking lines has appeared, or if any, maybe none have? Remember, most of these people are young.
We're not counting.
Are we counting Ian
Undead
Holm?
Ian Holm?
Okay, so that's the trick. That is the trick. So I was counting Ian Holm.
I don't think you can. That man's dead.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Ian Holm did not say any words. So an actor did, and then an AI.
It's a great point.
Adjusted
It was
his voice.
AI generated voice.
Okay.
So the answer is then false because
Okay.
none of the actors.
What was Ian Holm in that?
Well,
we
what
watched?
was he in? He was in Lord of the Rings. So we did Lord of the Rings.
You guys didn't do Elephant Man yet? That's like
We have not done
your
Elephant
wheelhouse.
Man.
I know it is in our
Yes.
wheelhouse, and one day
someday. Okay,
Somehow
so
you did the 2004 King Arthur, but you haven't done Elephant
you can
Man.
thank
Great.
John Gabris
you
for
can
that.
thank John
and
Gabris.
I thank him for many things.
Yeah.
I love that guy.
It's his favorite. It's one of his favorite films. He was like, "We're doing King Arthur," and I was like, "Great!" And then I reach out to
You're
him
like,
2
"Which
days
one?"
before. I was like, "So we're doing King Arthur, Guy Ritchie." He's like, "No. Anton Fuqua, King Arthur."
Yeah. That was
So,
a near. That was
shout out to
I mean,
John, who's probably listening.
I do love John very much. I've been listening to Intern Gino most of my adult life. It feels like
Very nice. Well,
good.
he
Love him.
will
Love you,
appreciate
John.
that. Okay, so I have one more quiz question. This is not a trick question,
Okay.
like that one maybe was. Okay, so the crew are seen drinking the same fictional kind of beer that the original crew from the Nostromo drink. So this is one of the many like silly Easter eggs.
Oh
Okay.
gosh. Okay.
Can you name?
I don't know any of this shit.
Okay.
I
Can
don't
you
know.
Can
name
I
the beer?
name
Okay.
it?
Now, I did not track this. Okay. They're drinking a type of beer. So I'm going to immediately give you a clue.
Yeah.
I have 4 clues that I'll give you. Okay.
Okay.
All right. And the clues are maybe more fun because if you have no idea, I have no idea.
I
Okay.
don't know.
So the
I don't
first
know.
is it shares its name with a city. Okay. So that might not help.
Okay.
Next
Okay.
clue is the city is in Colorado.
Okay.
Okay. The third clue, this is maybe where it gets fun. It's one of the locations in which Dumb and Dumber takes place.
They're drinking Aspen?
They're drinking Aspen beer.
Aspen. Yeah.
Well done, Scout. Congratulations. You won trivia because you
Hell
called out the presupposition failure of my first question, and then you won on clue 3.
It's just called Aspen?
It's called Aspen beer.
It's okay.
apparently,
Is
yeah.
it like Wayland Aspen beer?
Yes, apparently it's made by the Whalen Corporation.
Of course it
Yeah.
is.
Well, obviously they did that because the Coors Brewing Company is out of Colorado.
Yes.
Like that's
Makes
obviously
sense,
what they're
right?
going
It makes
for, but
sense.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Scout, thank you very much for being here. Do you have anything you want to plug? Anything you're working on? Anything you want to, where can people find you on social media?
I am. I think my Instagram is still private, but I'll accept you if you find me. I'm at Honors Zombie on Twitter. I'm at Honors_Zombie, and on Blue Sky, I think I'm at Honors Zombie. Go to my Patreon, patreon.com/Honors Zombie. Every week, a new video essay, 2 new written pieces of criticism, and a flashback posts. I am somehow, despite being essentially retired from criticism, the most prolific man in letters. I have movies you can watch. Obviously, if you join the Patreon, you get them all for free. But if you go to my Vimeo on demand pages, you'll find them all there. I just recently released 3 films simultaneously. The Western Hang the Pale Bastard, the sci-fi crime film Epigenesis, and the psychodrama 4 Nights.
Wait, are these like features or shorts?
These are features.
Wow.
These are features. I have made... And I have made 32 feature films. Some of them are just essays, like probably like 6 of them are just like essays that I made on my laptop with very little else going on. But the rest of them are fiction films made with actors, real people, and cameras. We made them for about, fucking $100 each, but they have heart. And they got soul, and they're interesting, and you should check them out.
Hell yeah.
I have a book on John Ford that you can buy at withthenextbook.com. I think actually it's on Barnes & Noble and Amazon now, called But God Made Him a Poet, Watching John Ford in the 21st Century. I have a book on Toby Hooper called Cinemophagy, on the psychedelic classical form of Toby Hooper. I was just at MoMA in New York City to introduce a screening of Life Force, which is one of his best This beautiful, I mean, speaking of, Freud and psychology, the Life Force is one of the most subtextually, symbolically loaded sci-fi films of the 1980s. Just a beautiful, beautiful film. So that was really cool. That was a very cool milestone to be at MoMA, introducing my beloved Tobe Hooper, one of his best films.
Congratulations. Thank you. We'll have to have you back for a Tobe Hooper joint.
Please do.
That sounds great. Okay, yeah, that sounds great. We should definitely. We haven't done any Tobe Hooper yet, but
not yet.
I have never seen Life Force, so maybe we should do that.
Oh yeah, you gotta fucking watch Life Force. I mean, like Texas Chainsaw is obviously the masterpiece. Of course, that's Citizen Kane. But he made so many beautiful films. I mean, Spontaneous Combustion, The Mangler is a gorgeous movie. That one's got all this beautiful Wellesian photography. Life Force is amazing. Texas Chainsaw 2 is gorgeous.
Poltergeist.
Poltergeist, still a great movie. I know a lot of people don't want to believe that he directed it, but he absolutely did, and his touch is felt all over that.
Yeah.
I should also say, me and my dear friend Tucker Johnson have a 10-part Ridley Scott video essay series you can watch called The End of History. And we get into the Romulus and Remus myth there. And this was before we even knew that the movie was going to be called Alien Romulus. We made this in 2021, 2022. And then lately we had a series called An Aim Not Devoid of Merit, which is all about the way that Steven Spielberg uses the camera eye. It's the way he blocks, the way he shoots, the way he choreographs. And we covered every one of his movies there, so you should check that out too.
Check it out, guys. Get on Scout's Patreon, get on the Vimeo, and check it out. Check out those video essays; they're really great, really informative. Do you want to share? I think Laura, you watched a couple of these.
Yeah, well,
we did Public Enemies.
You've covered a lot of the movies that we've done recently. So I watched Public Enemies, and also the Assassination of Jesse James with the Cow, Robert Ford. Yeah. So I was like, I know his voice before I know his face. When you came on, I was like, oh, that's what he looks like.
There we go. Thank you again for being here, Scout. And we are
thank you for having me.
Cheers. And we are at Cowspot on Twitter. You can find us on the web at cowspot.com, as aforementioned. And we have T-shirts. I'm not wearing one now. We often are wearing our stupid T-shirts while we record. You can buy it at cowspod.threadless.com. In 2 weeks, we'll be talking to Emily St. James about I Saw the TV Glow. It's great. We've already recorded it. It's fun. Emily is fantastic, and she has so much to say about that lovely movie. So please join us for that, and we'll see you then. Bye.